The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Princess Charlotte walked quietly through the East Wing corridors. Her small feet made barely any sound on the polished stone as she carried her favorite book about horses under her arm. At 8 years old, she had grown accustomed to the grand halls and endless rooms of palace life, but today felt different somehow. Charlotte had been looking forward to spending time in the library, a peaceful place where she could read without interruption. The palace staff knew not to disturb her during her reading hours, and her parents, Prince William and Catherine, encouraged this quiet time that helped her focus and learn. As she turned the corner near the portrait gallery, she nearly bumped into someone she didn't recognize. A boy, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, stood blocking her path. He had dark hair and wore expensive clothes, but there was something unsettling about the way he looked at her. Well, the boy said with a smirk that made Charlotte feel uncomfortable. If it isn't the little princess, all alone. Charlotte clutched her book tighter and tried to step around him, but he moved to block her again. She had been taught to be polite to everyone, but something about this situation felt wrong. Her governess had always told her to trust her instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling her to get away. "Excuse me," Charlotte said politely, trying to sound confident like her mother had taught her. "I need to get to the library." The boy laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. "Oh, you need to get to the library, do you? How very important." His voice was mocking, and Charlotte could smell something strange on his breath that reminded her of the wine her parents sometimes drank at dinner. "I think you need to learn some manners, little princess," the boy continued, stepping closer. "Just because you have a title doesn't mean you can ignore people." Charlotte's heart began to beat faster. She looked around the corridor, hoping to see one of the palace staff or guards, but the hallway was empty. The morning light from the tall windows created an eerie atmosphere, and the silence felt heavy and threatening. "I wasn't ignoring you," Charlotte said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I said excuse me. Now, please let me pass." But instead of moving aside, the boy grabbed her arm roughly. Charlotte dropped her book, and it hit the floor with a loud thud that echoed through the empty corridor. The sound seemed to anger the boy even more. "Don't you dare tell me what to do," he snarled, his grip tightening on her arm. "Do you know who I am? I'm Tom Parker Bowles, and my mother's going to be queen someday. That makes me more important than a little princess who thinks she's better than everyone else." Charlotte had heard the name before. She knew that Camilla had children from her previous marriage, but she had never met them. Her parents had mentioned them in passing, but Charlotte had never paid much attention to family politics. All she knew was that this boy was hurting her arm and scaring her. "Please let me go," Charlotte said, her voice starting to shake despite her efforts to stay calm. "You're hurting me." Tom's eyes grew darker, and his grip became even tighter. "Oh, I'm hurting you? Poor little princess. Maybe it's time someone taught you what real life is like outside your perfect little bubble." Before Charlotte could react, Tom pushed her backward toward the wall. Her back hit the cold marble with a painful thud, and suddenly she found herself trapped between the wall and this angry stranger. Her book lay forgotten on the floor as fear took over her small body. "Stop it," Charlotte said more loudly, hoping someone would hear her. But Tom just pressed closer, using his size and weight to keep her pinned against the wall. "Shut up," Tom hissed. "No one's coming to save you, princess. It's just you and me, and I think it's time you learn to show some respect." Charlotte tried to push him away, but he was much bigger and stronger than she was. Her mind raced as she remembered the self-defense lessons her protection officers had taught her, but in this moment of fear, everything seemed to slip away from her memory. The palace around them remained silent, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The morning light continued to stream through the windows, but it no longer felt warm and welcoming. Instead, it seemed harsh and cold, highlighting the fear in Charlotte's eyes and the cruel satisfaction on Tom's face. Charlotte thought about her parents, probably having breakfast in their private dining room, unaware of what was happening to their daughter. She thought about her brothers, George and Louis, likely still sleeping or playing in their rooms. She wondered if anyone would come looking for her when she didn't appear for her morning lessons. "Please," Charlotte whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I haven't done anything to you." Tom leaned closer, and Charlotte could see the anger and something else, something darker, in his expression. "You don't have to do anything, princess. You just have to exist with your perfect life and your perfect family while the rest of us have to fight for everything we get. The injustice of his words hit Charlotte like another physical blow. She had never asked to be born into the royal family, had never chosen this life of protocols and expectations. She was just a little girl who wanted to read her book about horses and maybe play with her brothers later. "I never asked for any of this," Charlotte said, finding a spark of courage somewhere deep inside her. "And neither did you. That doesn't give you the right to hurt me." For a moment, Tom seemed taken aback by her words, but then his expression hardened again. "Don't try to psychoanalyze me, little girl. You don't know anything about my life or what I've been through." Charlotte could see pain behind his anger now, but that didn't make her feel any safer. If anything, it made the situation more frightening because she realized that Tom wasn't thinking clearly. Whatever was driving him to behave this way was bigger than just dislike for her personally. The silence stretched between them, broken only by Charlotte's slightly labored breathing and the distant sounds of palace life carrying on normally in other parts of the building. Somewhere, staff members were preparing for the day's activities, completely unaware that one of the young royals was in danger just a few corridors away. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly, trying to calm her racing heart and think clearly. Her protection officers had taught her that staying calm was the most important thing in any dangerous situation. Panic would only make things worse and cloud her judgment. When she opened her eyes again, Tom was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was still anger there, but also something that might have been confusion or even a flicker of regret. Charlotte decided to try a different approach. "Tom," she said quietly, using his name for the first time, "I know you're angry, but this isn't going to help anything. If someone finds us like this, it will just cause problems for everyone, including you." Her words seemed to penetrate some of the fog of anger surrounding Tom, but instead of calming him down, they seemed to make him more agitated. He pressed closer to the wall, making Charlotte feel even more trapped. "Don't try to manipulate me," Tom said, but his voice lacked some of the venom it had held before. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Just like all of them. Just like my mother says you all think you're better than us." Charlotte realized that Tom's anger wasn't really about her at all. It was about feelings of inadequacy and resentment that had been building up for years. But understanding his motivations didn't make her situation any less dangerous. The palace corridor remained eerily quiet, the morning light now seeming almost accusatory as it illuminated this terrible scene. Charlotte wondered how long it would be before someone came looking for her, before someone realized that something was wrong. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint sound of footsteps, but they seemed to be moving away rather than toward them. Her heart sank as she realized that rescue might not be coming anytime soon. As these thoughts raced through her mind, Charlotte made a decision. She would not let fear completely take over. She would find a way to get through this situation, no matter what it took. Her parents had always told her that she was stronger than she knew, and now it was time to prove that to herself. The confrontation was far from over, and Charlotte had no idea how much worse things were about to become. But in this moment, pinned against the cold marble wall of her own home, she made a silent promise to herself that she would survive whatever was coming next. The morning sun continued its journey across the sky outside the palace windows, indifferent to the drama unfolding within the ancient walls. And somewhere in the distance, footsteps echoed through other corridors, belonging to people who had no idea that a young princess was fighting for her safety just rooms away. Tom's breathing had become heavier, and Charlotte could see that whatever internal struggle was happening inside him was reaching some kind of climax. She braced herself for whatever was coming next, knowing that her life might depend on how she handled the next few minutes. The palace around them remained silent, but Charlotte knew that silence wouldn't last forever. Someone would come eventually. Someone had to come. All she had to do was stay strong until that moment arrived. But as Tom's expression grew darker and more unpredictable, Charlotte began to wonder if help would arrive in time, or if she would have to find a way to save herself from this nightmare that had begun as such an ordinary morning. The weight of the situation pressed down on her like the cold marble wall against her back, and Charlotte realized that her childhood innocence was slipping away with each passing second. Whatever happened next would change her forever, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The tension in the corridor had become almost unbearable when Charlotte heard something that made her heart leap with hope. The sound of heavy, measured footsteps echoed from somewhere nearby, getting closer with each passing second. These weren't the soft steps of palace staff going about their daily duties, but the purposeful stride of someone trained for security. Tom heard the footsteps too, and for a moment, his grip on Charlotte loosened slightly. His head turned toward the sound, and Charlotte could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something that might have been fear. "Tom," Charlotte whispered urgently, seeing this as possibly her only chance to reason with him. "Let me go now, and we could both walk away from this. No one has to know what happened here." But Tom's moment of uncertainty passed quickly, and his expression hardened again. "Shut up," he hissed. "You're not going anywhere until I'm done with you." The footsteps were getting closer now, and Charlotte could hear the distinctive jingle of keys and equipment that royal protection officers carried. Her heart raced with a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that help was finally coming, but fear about what Tom might do when he realized they were about to be discovered. Sergeant James Mitchell had been a royal protection officer for 15 years. He had served 3 different royal families and prided himself on his ability to anticipate and prevent problems before they became serious threats. This morning, he was conducting his routine patrol of the palace's east wing when something caught his attention. It was too quiet. During his years of service, Mitchell had developed an instinct for the normal sounds and rhythms of palace life. He knew when something was out of place, and right now, everything felt wrong. The corridor should have had some activity by this time of morning, but instead, there was an unnatural silence that made him uneasy. As he rounded the corner near the portrait gallery, Mitchell saw something that made his blood run cold. Princess Charlotte, a child he had helped protect since she was born, was pressed against the wall by a much larger boy who had his hands on her in a clearly threatening manner. Mitchell's training kicked in immediately. He assessed the situation in seconds. One perpetrator, considerably larger than the victim, positioned in a way that suggested physical intimidation or worse. The victim was showing clear signs of distress and fear. This was exactly the kind of situation he had been trained to handle. "Step away from the princess immediately," Mitchell commanded, his voice carrying the authority of years of military and protection training. He moved forward with calculated precision, positioning himself to have the best tactical advantage while minimizing risk to Charlotte. Tom spun around at the sound of the commanding voice, his face showing shock and anger at being interrupted. "This is none of your business," Tom said, trying to maintain his aggressive posture despite the obvious authority of the protection officer. "This is a family matter." Mitchell had dealt with many different types of threats over the years, but one thing he had learned was that family dynamics could often be the most dangerous and unpredictable. He could see immediately that this young man was not in a rational state of mind. "I'm going to say this one more time," Mitchell said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable threat. "Step away from Princess Charlotte right now, or I will make you step away." Charlotte felt a rush of relief at hearing Sergeant Mitchell's voice. She had known him for years, had seen him countless times in the background of family events and daily life. He had always been kind to her, sometimes sharing a quiet joke or asking about her studies when their paths crossed in the palace. But Tom wasn't backing down. If anything, the arrival of the protection officer seemed to make him more desperate and unpredictable. "You don't understand," Tom said, his voice rising. "She thinks she's better than everyone else. Someone needs to teach her a lesson." Mitchell could see the situation deteriorating rapidly. The young man was clearly not thinking rationally, and his proximity to Princess Charlotte made any physical intervention extremely risky. Mitchell had to find a way to de-escalate the situation without triggering a violent reaction that could harm Charlotte. "I understand you're upset," Mitchell said, taking a small step closer but keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "But Princess Charlotte is just a child, and whatever you're angry about, this isn't the way to handle it." Charlotte watched this exchange with growing hope, but also increasing fear. She could see that Tom was becoming more agitated as he realized his control over the situation was slipping away. His breathing was becoming more erratic, and his grip on her arm was tightening again. "You don't know anything," Tom said to Mitchell. "You don't know what it's like to have everyone expect you to be grateful for scraps while they get everything handed to them on a golden platter." Mitchell recognized the tone and content of Tom's words. This wasn't just a random act of aggression. This was someone with deep-seated resentment, and feelings of injustice that had been building up over time. These kinds of situations were often the most dangerous because the perpetrator felt they had nothing left to lose. "Help me understand," Mitchell said, continuing his careful approach of trying to establish communication while slowly positioning himself for intervention if necessary. "Tell me what's really bothering you." For a moment, it seemed like Tom might actually respond to Mitchell's attempt at understanding. His expression softened slightly, and Charlotte felt his grip loosen just a little. But then something seemed to snap back into place, and the anger returned with full force. "Don't patronize me," Tom snarled. "I know what you're doing. You're just trying to distract me so you can grab me. Well, it's not going to work." Charlotte realized that Tom's paranoia was making the situation more dangerous, not less. He was interpreting every attempt at communication as manipulation, every gesture as a potential threat. She began to understand that this confrontation was going to end badly no matter what anyone said or did. Mitchell came to the same realization at almost the same moment. His years of experience told him that this young man was past the point of rational negotiation. The only question now was how to extract Princess Charlotte from the situation with minimal harm. "Tom," Mitchell said, using the name he had heard Charlotte speak earlier, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Right now, you're in a situation that can still be resolved without serious consequences. But if you continue down this path, things are going to get much worse for you." Tom laughed bitterly. "Worse? You think things can get worse for me? Do you have any idea what my life has been like? Do you know what it's like to be the stepson that nobody really wants around?" Charlotte felt a pang of unexpected sympathy for Tom, even in her current situation. She was beginning to understand that his anger came from a place of real pain and rejection. But that understanding didn't make her feel any safer or make his actions any more acceptable. "I know it's been difficult," Mitchell said carefully, "but taking your anger out on a child who has nothing to do with your problems isn't going to solve anything. It's only going to create new problems for everyone, including you." The standoff continued, with Mitchell trying to find the right words to defuse the situation while simultaneously preparing for the possibility that he would need to use physical force. His priority was clear: protect Princess Charlotte at all costs. But he also knew that any sudden movement could escalate the situation into violence. Charlotte found her voice again, surprising both men. "Tom," she said quietly, looking directly at him despite her fear, "I'm sorry that you've been hurt. I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong sometimes. But hurting me won't make your pain go away." Her words seemed to have an effect that neither Mitchell's authority nor his attempts at understanding had achieved. Tom's expression flickered with something that might have been recognition or even shame. For just a moment, Charlotte saw past his anger to the hurt and confused person underneath. But that moment of connection also seemed to frighten Tom, as if showing vulnerability was more dangerous than showing aggression. He pressed closer to Charlotte again, and Mitchell knew that time was running out for a peaceful resolution. "That's enough talking," Tom said, his voice shaking now with emotion rather than just anger. "I'm tired of everyone trying to get inside my head. I'm tired of being told what I should feel and how I should act." Mitchell made a decision. He couldn't wait any longer for the perfect moment or the perfect words. Princess Charlotte was in immediate danger, and it was his job to protect her, regardless of the consequences to himself or anyone else. "Tom," Mitchell said one final time, his voice now carrying a note of finality, "I'm giving you exactly 3 seconds to step away from Princess Charlotte. If you don't, I'm going to make you step away, and you're not going to like how that happens." The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as she waited to see what would happen next. The morning light streaming through the palace windows seemed to pause, as if even time itself was holding its breath to see how this confrontation would end. Tom's eyes darted between Mitchell and Charlotte, and she could see him trying to calculate his options. But Charlotte could also see that rational calculation was not really possible for him in his current state. Whatever decision he made would be driven by emotion rather than logic. Mitchell began his count. 1. Charlotte closed her eyes, knowing that whatever happened in the next few seconds would change everything. The peaceful morning she had planned, the simple desire to read her book in the library, seemed like memories from another lifetime. 2. The tension in the corridor was so thick it seemed to have physical weight. Charlotte could feel Tom's indecision through his grip on her arm, could sense Mitchell coiling himself like a spring, ready to act. And Then, just as Mitchell opened his mouth to say 3, everything exploded in emotion at once. The explosion of movement happened so quickly that Charlotte barely had time to process what was occurring around her. One moment she was pressed against the cold marble wall with Tom's angry face inches from hers, and the next moment everything became a blur of bodies, voices, and sudden violence. Mitchell moved with the precision and speed that came from years of training and experience. He had calculated the exact angle and force needed to separate Tom from Charlotte while minimizing the risk of harm to the princess. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Tom's shoulder and pulled him away from Charlotte, while simultaneously positioning his own body as a protective barrier between them. Tom, caught off guard by the sudden intervention, stumbled backward but quickly regained his footing. The anger that had been simmering throughout the confrontation now exploded into full rage. "Get your hands off me!" he screamed, launching himself at Mitchell with wild, uncoordinated swings. Charlotte pressed herself against the wall, watching in horror as the two men grappled in front of her. She had never seen violence like this before, had never witnessed the frightening reality of what happened when anger and training collided. The sounds of their struggle echoed through the corridor like thunder in the previously peaceful palace. Mitchell was clearly the more skilled fighter, but Tom's rage gave him a desperate strength that made him dangerous and unpredictable. Mitchell had to balance his need to subdue Tom with his responsibility to protect Charlotte, who was still within reach of the struggle. "Princess Charlotte, move away from here now," Mitchell commanded between blocks and defensive moves. But Charlotte found herself frozen, unable to process the instruction through her shock and fear. Tom managed to break free from Mitchell's initial hold and stumbled backward, his chest heaving and his eyes wild with fury. "This isn't over," he panted. "You think you could just push me around like everyone else does?" Mitchell maintained his defensive stance, keeping himself between Tom and Charlotte. "The only thing I'm thinking about is protecting a child from someone who clearly needs help," Mitchell replied, his voice steady despite the physical exertion. "But if you want to continue this fight, I'm prepared to give you exactly what you're asking for." The threat in Mitchell's voice was unmistakable, and Charlotte could see that he was no longer trying to de-escalate the situation. The time for negotiation had passed the moment Tom chose violence over surrender. Tom seemed to realize this too, but instead of backing down, he became even more aggressive. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, pulling something from his pocket that glinted in the morning light. Charlotte's heart stopped as she realized it was a small knife. Mitchell's expression hardened instantly. A weapon changed everything about the situation. This was no longer just a physical altercation between two people. It was now a deadly threat to a member of the royal family. Mitchell's training and instincts took over completely. "Put the knife down, Tom," Mitchell said, his voice now carrying the cold authority of someone who had faced life-or-death situations before. "You're making this much worse for yourself." But Tom was past the point of listening to reason. The knife seemed to give him confidence, and he held it in front of him like a shield against the world that had hurt him so much. "No one's going to push me around anymore," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Not you, not her, not anyone." Charlotte finally found her voice. "Please don't do this," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Someone's going to get hurt." Her words seemed to cut through some of Tom's rage, and for a moment, his hand holding the knife trembled with uncertainty. Charlotte could see the internal battle playing out on his face, the struggle between his anger and whatever remaining rational thought he had left. Mitchell saw the same hesitation and tried to use it to his advantage. "She's right, Tom. Someone's going to get seriously hurt here, and it doesn't have to be that way. Put the knife down, and we can work this out." But the moment of uncertainty passed quickly, and Tom's resolve hardened again. "Work it out, like the way everyone has worked things out for me my whole life. Always making decisions about what's best for me without ever asking what I want." The pain in Tom's voice was raw and real, and Charlotte found herself crying not just from fear, but from genuine sadness for this troubled young man who had somehow become her enemy. She could see now that his anger wasn't really about her at all, but about years of feeling powerless and overlooked. Mitchell recognized that reasoning with Tom was no longer possible. The knife made this a clear and present danger to Princess Charlotte, and Mitchell's sworn duty was to neutralize the threat by any means necessary. He began to calculate his options for disarming Tom without anyone getting seriously injured. The sound of running footsteps in the distance caught all three of their attention. Someone else was coming, drawn by the sounds of the struggle. Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and terror, knowing that more people arriving could either help resolve the situation or make it much more dangerous. "Tom," Mitchell said urgently, hearing the approaching footsteps, "in about 30 seconds, this corridor is going to be full of armed security personnel. Right now, you're looking at assault charges. If you hurt anyone with that knife, you're looking at attempted murder or worse. Is that really how you want this to end?" Tom's eyes darted toward the sound of approaching footsteps, and Charlotte could see panic beginning to mix with his anger. He was clearly realizing that his situation was spiraling out of control, but instead of making him more reasonable, this realization seemed to make him more desperate. "I don't care anymore," Tom said, his voice breaking slightly. "Everyone's going to hate me anyway. Everyone already hates me. What difference does it make what happens now?" Charlotte's heart broke at the despair at his voice. Despite everything he had done to her, despite the fear and pain he had caused, she could hear the voice of someone who felt completely alone in the world. It was a feeling she recognized because sometimes, even surrounded by family and staff, she felt alone too. "I don't hate you," Charlotte said quietly, her voice barely audible above the sound of approaching footsteps. "I'm scared of you right now, but I don't hate you." Her words seemed to hit Tom like a physical blow. He stared at her with an expression of complete surprise, as if the possibility that she might not hate him had never occurred to him. The knife in his hand lowered slightly. Mitchell saw the opening and took it in one swift movement. He closed the distance between himself and Tom, grabbed the wrist holding the knife, and twisted until Tom's grip loosened enough for the weapon to fall to the floor. The sound of metal hitting marble echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. Tom offered no resistance as Mitchell quickly secured the knife and moved it out of reach. It was as if Charlotte's words had drained all the fight out of him, leaving behind only exhaustion and confusion. The footsteps were much closer now, and Charlotte could hear voices calling her name. She recognized her father's voice among them, filled with worry and fear. She wanted to call out to let him know she was safe, but her voice seemed to have deserted her again. Mitchell maintained his hold on Tom while scanning the corridor for the knife and any other potential threats. His training told him that the immediate danger was over, but he remained vigilant. Situations like this could change quickly, and he couldn't afford to relax until backup arrived. "It's over now," Mitchell said gently to Charlotte, though he kept his eyes on Tom. "Your father is coming. You're safe." Charlotte nodded, but she couldn't take her eyes off Tom. He looked so different now, without the anger animating his features. He looked young and lost and incredibly sad. She found herself wondering what had happened in his life to create so much pain and rage. Prince William rounded the corner at that moment, followed by 3 other protection officers. The sight of his daughter, obviously shaken but unharmed, with a restrained young man and a knife on the floor, told him everything he needed to know about what had transpired. "Charlotte," William called out, rushing to her side. "Are you hurt? What happened here?" Charlotte fell into her father's arms, finally, allowing herself to feel the full impact of what she had just experienced. The fear, the adrenaline, and the emotional complexity of the situation all hit her at once, and she began to sob uncontrollably. William held his daughter tightly while his eyes met Mitchell's over her head. The protection officer's expression told him that the situation had been serious, potentially life-threatening. William felt a mixture of gratitude toward Mitchell and fury toward the young man who had threatened his child. "Sergeant Mitchell, report," William said quietly, trying not to upset Charlotte further, but needing to understand what had happened. Mitchell gave a brief, professional account of the situation while the other protection officers secured Tom and the area. Tom offered no resistance, seeming almost relieved that the confrontation was finally over. He sat on the floor where the officers had placed him, staring at nothing with empty eyes. As Mitchell explained what had transpired, William's anger grew, but he also began to recognize the name Tom Parker Bowles. The political and family implications of this incident began to dawn on him, adding another layer of complexity to an already traumatic situation. Charlotte pulled back from her father's embrace and looked over at Tom. Despite everything that had happened, She felt sorry for him. She could see that he was suffering just as much as she was, maybe more. The anger that had driven him to violence seemed to have completely disappeared, leaving behind only emptiness. "Dad," Charlotte said quietly, "I think he needs help more than punishment." William looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Even after being threatened and frightened, she was capable of compassion for her attacker. It was a quality that would serve her well in her future royal duties, but William worried about her ability to protect herself if she was always looking for the good in people. The corridor that had been so quiet and peaceful just an hour earlier was now filled with people and activity. Medical personnel had arrived to check on Charlotte. Additional security was sweeping the area, and senior palace staff were beginning to assess the implications of what had occurred. As the immediate crisis was managed, Charlotte found herself thinking about the morning that had started so simply with just wanting to read a book in a library. That innocence seemed lost forever now, replaced by a new understanding of how quickly safety could disappear and how complex the emotions behind violence could be. The knife lay on the marble floor where Mitchell had secured it, a small but potent reminder of how close things had come to tragedy. Charlotte stared at it and realized that her life had just changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. Tom was led away by the protection officers, but not before he caught Charlotte's eye one last time. She saw regret there, and gratitude, and something that might have been an apology. Charlotte nodded slightly, a gesture that acknowledged their shared humanity despite the circumstances that had brought them together. As the corridors slowly emptied and life began to return to normal, Charlotte remained close to her father, trying to process everything that had happened. The morning sun continued to shine through the palace windows, but everything felt different now, as if the light itself had changed quality. The peaceful world of childhood reading and horse books seemed very far away, replaced by a new awareness of the darkness that could exist even in the most secure and protected places. Charlotte knew she would never again walk through the palace corridors with quite the same sense of safety and innocence that she had felt just hours earlier. The hours following the incident in the palace corridor passed in a blur of activity that Charlotte had never experienced before. Her quiet morning had been transformed into a crisis that reached the highest levels of the royal family and government. As she sat in her father's private study, wrapped in a soft blanket and clutching a cup of hot chocolate, Charlotte could hear the urgent conversations happening just outside the door. Prince William had called an immediate family meeting, and Catherine had rushed back from her scheduled engagement the moment she received word of what had happened. Charlotte could see the strain and worry on both her parents' faces, though they tried to hide it from her with gentle smiles and reassuring words. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Catherine asked for what felt like the 100th time, sitting down beside Charlotte and smoothing her daughter's hair. "Are you sure you're not hurt anywhere?" Charlotte nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. She wasn't physically injured, but she felt different inside, as if something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of the world. The palace had always been her safe space, the place where she could be just a little girl without worrying about the dangers that existed outside its walls. "I keep thinking about Tom," Charlotte said quietly, surprising her parents with her honesty. "I know he scared me, and I know what he did was wrong, but I can't stop thinking about how sad he looked at the end." William and Catherine exchanged a meaningful look over Charlotte's head. They had been discussing this very issue for the past hour, trying to balance their anger and concern for their daughter's safety with the complex family dynamics that had led to this situation. "What happened to you was not your fault, Charlotte," William said firmly. "And while I understand that you feel sorry for Tom, what he did was serious and could have hurt you badly. Sometimes people who are hurting inside make very bad choices that affect other people." Charlotte nodded again, but she could tell that her parents were struggling with something beyond just her immediate well-being. She had grown up in this world of careful conversations and diplomatic language, and she could sense the political undercurrents flowing beneath their concern for her. Dr. Sarah Collins, the palace physician, had examined Charlotte thoroughly and declared her physically unharmed, though she recommended counseling to help process the traumatic experience. Charlotte had answered all the doctor's questions honestly, describing the fear and confusion she had felt, but also the moments of unexpected understanding she had experienced with Tom. "Your Highnesses," came a soft knock at the study door, followed by the voice of Sir Edward Hartwell, Prince William's private secretary. King Charles would like to see you when convenient. The Queen Consort has also arrived and is requesting a meeting. Charlotte felt her stomach tighten at the mention of Camilla. She knew that Tom was Camilla's son, which meant that this incident wasn't just about her and Tom anymore. It was about families and relationships and all the complicated things that adults had to deal with when something went wrong. "We'll be there shortly," William replied, then turned back to Charlotte. "Would you like to stay here with your governess, or do you want to come with us?" Charlotte considered the question carefully. Part of her wanted to hide in her room and pretend none of this had happened, but another part of her felt that she needed to be involved in whatever was going to happen next. After all, she was the one who had experienced this, and she was the only one who really understood what Tom had been feeling. "I want to come," Charlotte said finally. "I think I should hear what everyone has to say." Catherine looked uncertain about this decision, but William nodded slowly. "All right," he said, "but if you change your mind at any point, you can leave. This is adult business, and you don't have to handle more than you're comfortable with." As they walked through the palace corridors toward King Charles's private office, Charlotte found herself looking at the familiar surroundings with new eyes. The portraits of previous monarchs that lined the walls seemed to watch her with knowing expressions, as if they had seen similar family crises play out over the centuries. The morning light streaming through the tall windows looked the same as it had a few hours earlier, but Charlotte felt like she was seeing it through different eyes now. She wondered if this was what growing up felt like, this sudden awareness that the world was more complicated and dangerous than she had realized. They reached the office where a small group had already assembled. King Charles stood behind his desk with an expression Charlotte had rarely seen before, a mixture of concern, anger, and deep sadness. Camilla sat in one of the chairs facing the desk, her face pale and drawn with what appeared to be a combination of embarrassment and grief. Also present were Sir Edward, the head of palace security, and a woman Charlotte didn't recognize who was introduced as a crisis management specialist from the Royal Communications team. The presence of so many serious adults made Charlotte realize just how significant this incident was considered to be. "Charlotte," King Charles said gently when he saw her, "how are you feeling, my dear? I know this has been a very difficult day for you." "I'm okay, Grandpapa," Charlotte replied, using the informal title she had always used for Charles. "I was scared, but Sergeant Mitchell made sure I was safe." Charles nodded approvingly. Sergeant Mitchell will be receiving a commendation for his actions today. His quick thinking and professionalism prevented what could have been a much worse situation. Camilla had been sitting quietly, but now she stood up and approached Charlotte slowly, as if she was afraid of frightening her further. Charlotte could see tears in her step-grandmother's eyes and genuine distress on her face. "Charlotte," Camilla said, her voice shaking slightly, "I am so very sorry about what happened today. There is no excuse for Tom's behavior, and I want you to know that none of this was your fault." Charlotte looked up at Camilla and saw a woman who was clearly suffering. Whatever anger or resentment she might have felt toward Tom's family seemed less important than the obvious pain Camilla was experiencing. "I know it wasn't my fault," Charlotte said quietly, "and I know Tom was hurting about something. Maybe if someone had helped him before today, this wouldn't have happened." The adults in the room exchanged glances at Charlotte's mature response to the situation. It was clear that despite her young age, she understood the complexity of what had occurred and was capable of seeing beyond her own experience to the larger issues involved. "You're right about that, Charlotte," Charles said. "Tom has been struggling with some personal issues for a while now, and perhaps we as a family haven't done enough to address those struggles. That doesn't excuse his actions today, but it does mean we need to think carefully about how to handle the situation going forward." The head of palace security spoke up for the first time. "Your Majesty, from a security standpoint, we need to ensure that this type of incident cannot happen again. We've already reviewed our protocols and identified several areas where improvements can be made." Charlotte listened as the adults discussed security measures, media management, and family dynamics. She was struck by how quickly her personal experience had become a matter of public concern and political consideration. It made her feel both important and overwhelmed at the same time. "What's going to happen to Tom?" Charlotte asked during a pause in the adult conversation. "Is he going to jail?" The question brought the room to silence. It was clear that this was one of the most difficult aspects of the situation to resolve. Tom had committed a serious crime, but he was also family, and The public nature of any legal proceedings would create additional complications for everyone involved. That's still being determined, Williams said carefully. Tom will need to face consequences for his actions, but we also want to make sure he gets the help he clearly needs. Camilla spoke up again, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to get Tom into therapy for months, but he's refused to go. I think this incident has finally made him realize that he needs help, but I'm not sure if it's too late for our family to recover from this. Charlotte felt a pang of sympathy for Camilla. She could see that Tom's actions had hurt his mother almost as much as they had hurt Charlotte herself. The ripple effects of violence extended far beyond the immediate victims, touching everyone connected to the situation. I don't think it's too late, Charlotte said, surprising herself with her boldness. But I think Tom needs to understand that getting help isn't punishment. It's a way to make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else or himself. The crisis management specialist had been taking notes throughout the conversation, and now she spoke for the first time. From a public relations standpoint, we need to consider how this story will be received if it becomes public. The family's response to this incident could significantly impact public perception of the monarchy. Charlotte felt a flash of anger at this comment. Is that really what's most important right now? She asked. What people think about us? Shouldn't we be more worried about making sure everyone gets the help they need? Her question brought another moment of silence to the room. The adults seemed taken aback by her directness, but Charlotte could see approval in her grandfather's eyes and pride in her parents' expressions. You're absolutely right, Charlotte, Charles said firmly. Our primary concern should be the well-being of everyone involved, not public perception, though we do need to be prepared for media interest if word of this incident leaks out. The conversation continued for another hour, with various aspects of the situation being discussed and debated. Charlotte listened carefully, learning about the complex considerations that went into family and political decision-making at the highest levels. As the meeting drew to a close, it was decided that Tom would be given the option of entering a residential treatment program instead of facing immediate criminal charges. The decision would ultimately be up to him, but the family hoped that the events of the day had made him realize he needed help. Charlotte, Charles said as the group prepared to disperse, I want you to know how proud I am of how you've handled this situation. Your compassion and maturity have been remarkable, and they've helped us find a path forward that serves everyone's best interests. Charlotte felt a warmth spread through her chest at her grandfather's words. Despite the trauma of the morning, she felt that she had learned something important about herself and about the kind of person she wanted to be. As they left the office, Charlotte found herself walking beside Camilla. Her step-grandmother looked exhausted and older than she had that morning, as if the day's events had aged her years in just a few hours. Camilla, Charlotte said quietly, I hope Tom gets better. And I hope you're okay too. This can't be easy for you. Camilla stopped walking and looked down at Charlotte with tears in her eyes. Thank you for saying that, my dear. You've shown more grace and understanding today than many adults would have managed. I hope someday Tom realizes what an extraordinary young woman he hurt today. As they continued walking through the palace corridors, Charlotte thought about how the morning had started with such simple expectations. She had wanted to read a book about horses and spend a quiet day learning and playing. Instead, she had experienced violence, fear, and the complex emotional aftermath of a family crisis. But she had also discovered things about herself that she hadn't known before. She had found courage when she needed it, compassion when it would have been easier to feel only anger, and wisdom that surprised even herself. The palace around her looked the same as it had that morning, but Charlotte knew that she would never see it quite the same way again. She was no longer just a child playing in the safety of her home. She was someone who had faced real danger and emerged not just unharmed, but somehow stronger and more understanding of the world around her. As they reached her family's private quarters, Charlotte felt the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. She was tired in a way she had never experienced before, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. The events of the day had challenged everything she thought she knew about safety, family, and human nature. But despite the trauma and fear she had experienced, Charlotte also felt a sense of growth and maturation that she knew would stay with her forever. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting with compassion despite that fear. and she had learned that understanding others, even those who hurt us, was often the first step toward healing and moving forward. 3 months had passed since the incident in the palace corridor, and the autumn sunshine filtered through the windows of the treatment center where Tom Parker Bowles sat across from his therapist, Dr. Rebecca Morrison. The residential facility was located in the countryside, far from the media attention and family pressures that had contributed to his breakdown. Tom looked different now than he had on that terrible morning in the palace. The anger that had consumed him for so long was still there, but it was no longer the driving force behind his every thought and action. Months of therapy, medication, and the structured environment of the treatment center had helped him begin to understand the roots of his pain and develop healthier ways of dealing with his emotions. "How are you feeling about the letter?" Dr. Morrison asked, referring to the envelope that sat unopened on the table between them. It had arrived that morning with a palace postmark, and Tom knew exactly who it was from. "Scared," Tom admitted, his voice quiet but steady. "I know I need to face what I did, but I'm not sure I'm ready to hear what she has to say. I hurt a child, Dr. Morrison, an innocent little girl who never did anything to deserve what I put her through." Dr. Morrison nodded understandingly. Over the months they had worked together, she had watched Tom slowly move past his initial defenses and excuses to reach this point of genuine accountability. It was a crucial step in his healing process, but she knew it was also one of the most difficult. "What do you think Princess Charlotte might say in her letter?" she asked gently. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring at the envelope with its familiar royal seal. "I don't know," he finally said. "Part of me thinks she'll tell me how much I scared her and how angry she is. But there's another part of me that remembers how she looked at me at the end, after Sergeant Mitchell took the knife away. She looked sad for me, not angry. I don't understand that. Why don't you think you understand her compassion?" Dr. Morrison probed gently. "Because I don't deserve it," Tom said immediately. "I threatened her. I could have seriously hurt her. She should hate me, not feel sorry for me." Dr. Morrison had heard variations of this conversation many times over the past months. Tom's inability to accept forgiveness or kindness was tied to his deep-seated belief that he was fundamentally unworthy of love or understanding. It was a belief that had been reinforced by years of feeling like an outsider in his own family. "Tom," she said carefully, "what if Princess Charlotte's capacity for compassion says something about her character rather than about whether or not you deserve it? What if her ability to see past your actions to your pain is a gift she has, rather than something you've earned?" Tom considered this perspective, which was still difficult for him to accept. His worldview had been built around the idea that love and acceptance had to be earned through perfect behavior, and that any failure meant complete rejection. Learning to see forgiveness as grace rather than debt was an ongoing challenge. "I suppose I should read it," Tom said finally, reaching for the envelope with trembling fingers. She took the time to write it, so the least I can do is take the time to read it. He carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter, which was written in the neat handwriting of an 8-year-old girl who had clearly taken great care with her words. "Dear Tom," the letter began, and Tom had to stop reading for a moment to collect himself. The simple greeting, without any title or formality, hit him unexpectedly hard. "I wanted to write to you because I've been thinking about you a lot since that day in the palace. I know what you did was wrong, and I know it scared me very much, but I also know that you were hurting inside when it happened." Tom's hands shook as he continued reading. Charlotte's words were simple and direct, but they carried an emotional weight that made him feel both grateful and ashamed. "My parents and my grandfather have explained to me about mental health and how sometimes people act in ways that don't represent who they really are inside. I think maybe that's what happened with you. I hope you're getting help now and that you're feeling better." Tears began to form in Tom's eyes as he read these words of understanding and hope from someone who had every right to hate him. The generosity of spirit shown by this young girl was almost too much for him to bear. "I want you to know that I forgive you for what happened. I don't think you're a bad person, Tom. I think you're a person who was in a lot of pain and made some bad choices because of that pain. I hope someday you can forgive yourself too." Tom had to put the letter down for a moment as tears started flowing freely down his face. In all his life, no one had ever spoken to him with such clear-eyed compassion. Not his teachers, not his family, not even the therapist he had refused to see before his breakdown. The letter continues, Dr. Morrison said gently. noticing that Tom had stopped reading. "Are you able to continue, or would you like to take a break?" "I can't continue," Tom said, wiping his eyes and picking up the letter again. "I've been learning a lot about forgiveness since that day," Charlotte's letter continued. "It's not about pretending that bad things didn't happen or that they didn't hurt. It's about choosing not to let the hurt turn into hate. I think hate would hurt me more than it would hurt you, so I choose not to carry it." Tom was amazed by the sophistication of this thinking from someone so young. It was a lesson that many adults never learned, and yet this 8-year-old girl had somehow found her way to this wisdom through her own experience of trauma. "I also wanted to tell you that your mother loves you very much. I can see it in her eyes when people mention your name. She's sad that you're going through this, but she's also proud that you're getting help. I think she would like to visit you if you're ready for that." This observation about his mother hit Tom particularly hard. His relationship with Camilla had been complicated by his resentment over her marriage to Charles and his feelings of displacement within the royal family. He had interpreted her attempts to help him as criticism and control rather than love and concern. Finally, the letter concluded, "I want you to know that when you're better, you'll always be welcome in our family. What happened that day doesn't define who you are, and it doesn't mean you can't be part of our lives. I believe in second chances, and I believe in you." The letter was signed simply Charlotte, with a small drawing of a horse underneath, which made Tom smile despite his tears. Even in a letter about such serious topics, she had included a reference to her love of horses, showing that she remained fundamentally a child despite the maturity of her words. Tom sat in silence for several minutes after finishing the letter, processing the emotions and thoughts it had triggered. Dr. Morrison waited patiently, understanding that this was a crucial moment in Tom's healing journey. "She's extraordinary," Tom finally said. "I can't believe she wrote this to me after what I put her through. How does someone so young have such wisdom and kindness? Children often have a natural capacity for forgiveness that adults sometimes lose," Dr. Morrison replied. "They haven't yet learned all the reasons why forgiveness is supposed to be complicated or conditional." Charlotte's response is remarkable, but it's also a testament to how she's been raised and to her own inherent character. Tom nodded, thinking about the stark contrast between Charlotte's response to trauma and his own. Where he had been consumed by anger and resentment for years, she had found a way to transform her painful experience into compassion and understanding. "I want to write back to her," Tom said suddenly. "I want to thank her and apologize properly. But I also want to tell her about what I've learned here and how her letter has helped me." Dr. Morrison smiled. "I think that would be a very positive step. What would you want to say to her?" Tom thought for a moment. "I want to tell her that her kindness has shown me what's possible when someone chooses love over hate. I want to tell her that I'm working every day to become worthy of the forgiveness she's given me, even though I know I may never fully succeed." Over the following days, Tom worked on his response to Charlotte's letter. It went through many drafts as he struggled to find words that adequately expressed his gratitude and remorse. Dr. Morrison helped him process his feelings and find authentic language that reflected his genuine growth and understanding. Meanwhile, at the palace, Charlotte had been continuing her own healing process. She had worked with a counselor to process the trauma of that morning, and her parents had been careful to maintain as much normalcy as possible in her daily routine, while also being attentive to any signs of ongoing distress. The incident had changed Charlotte in some fundamental ways. She was more aware of the potential for danger in the world, but she had also developed a deeper understanding of human complexity and the importance of compassion. Her teachers and parents had noticed a new maturity in how she approached conflicts and difficulties. When Tom's letter arrived in response to hers, Charlotte felt nervous excitement about reading it. She had hoped that her words would help him in some way, but she wasn't sure what to expect from his reply. "Dear Charlotte," Tom's letter began, "I don't know how to thank you for your letter. Your kindness and forgiveness mean more to me than I can possibly express. You have given me something I didn't think I deserved and hadn't thought to ask for." Charlotte read carefully, noting how different Tom's writing felt from the angry, desperate person she had encountered that morning months ago. There was sadness in his words, but also hope and genuine remorse. "I want to apologize to you properly," the letter continued. "What I did was wrong, and there's no excuse for it. I was angry and hurt about things that had nothing to do with you, and I took those feelings out on you in a way that could have caused you serious harm. I'm sorry for scaring you, for hurting you, and for taking away your sense of safety in your own home." These words meant a great deal to Charlotte. While she had already forgiven Tom, hearing him take full responsibility for his actions helped her feel more confident in her decision to extend that forgiveness. "Your letter helped me understand something important about the difference between consequences and punishment," Tom wrote. "I'm here getting help not because I'm being punished, but because facing the consequences of my actions means taking responsibility for getting better. Your forgiveness doesn't take away those consequences, but it gives me hope that healing and redemption are possible." Charlotte found this perspective fascinating. She was learning through this experience that forgiveness was more complex than she had initially understood, involving not just releasing anger, but also supporting the process of growth and accountability. The letters between Charlotte and Tom continued over the following months, becoming an important part of both their healing journeys. For Charlotte, they provided a way to process her experience and practice the kind of compassionate leadership she knew would be important in her future role. For Tom, they offered evidence that transformation was possible and that his past actions didn't have to define his future. As Christmas approached, Tom's treatment team began discussing his transition back into the world outside the residential facility. His mother Camilla had been visiting regularly, and their relationship had improved significantly as they worked through years of misunderstanding and hurt feelings. The final letter in their correspondence came from Charlotte as Tom prepared to leave the treatment center. It was shorter than her previous letters, but no less meaningful. "Dear Tom," she wrote, "I heard that you're getting ready to leave the treatment center, and I wanted you to know how happy I am about your progress. You've worked very hard to understand yourself and to get better, and that takes real courage. I hope that when you're ready, we can meet again in person. Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I want you to know that I see you as you are now, not just as you were on your worst day. Everyone deserves the chance to be known for their best self, and I believe your best self is someone worth knowing. I'll be thinking of you as you start this new chapter of your life. Remember that you have people who care about you and want to see you succeed. You're not alone anymore." The letter was signed, "Your friend, Charlotte," with another small drawing of a horse. When Tom read this final letter, he realized that his relationship with Charlotte had taught him something profound about the nature of grace and redemption. Her willingness to see past his worst moment to his potential for growth had given him a model for how to treat others and how to view himself. As he prepared to leave the treatment center and begin rebuilding his life, Tom carried with him the knowledge that transformation was possible, that forgiveness could be both given and received, and that sometimes the greatest teachers come in the smallest packages. Charlotte, now older and wiser than her years might suggest, continued to grow into the kind of leader who would someday help heal not just individual relationships, but perhaps even nations. The compassion and wisdom she had shown in her darkest hour had become the foundation for strength that would serve her throughout her life. The incident that had begun as a moment of violence and fear had ultimately become a story of healing and hope, proving that even the most difficult circumstances can become opportunities for growth when met with courage, understanding, and grace.